I think Morgan Le Fay's design in SMITE has significant problems. Not the visual design, but her actual abilities. Ahoy, my name is SLOTH, and today we're talking about Morgan Le Fay. Now, full disclosure here. I don't like Morgan Le Fay's kit, and I don't think that will change when changes to her are implemented. I am just someone who doesn't enjoy her type of ranged, poke-ish playstyle. But that's okay, everyone has different tastes. I do, however, think even if you enjoy her, there are certain things about her that are probably still unenjoyable regardless of you overall liking her, and there are things that can quite easily be improved about her. So in this context, we'll talk about balance, but we'll also talk a little bit about what she originally was presented as and what she actually is now. And no, I'm not talking about the assumption from the data mining that she may have been an assassin or hunter. I'm talking about her presentation as a mage. Let's begin with her abilities, then go over some comparisons to other gods, and then also talk about her design choices. The first thing that in one way is very frustrating is her first ability, Sigil Mastery. Now, Sigil Mastery has the lowest base damage of her abilities, but the highest scaling, and also applies the damage at least close to instantly compared to the 3 with its long ticks, and it also has the shortest cooldown. So after often feeling that situations where I leveled the 3 first felt very underwhelming, I actually switched to leveling the 1, and that actually feels better, but it also means that clearing the wave will remain somewhat annoying. But that's not the main problem that I have with this ability. That comes from the fact that it has the 3 different versions. The first one fears enemies in the sword area for 1 second. The second one slows enemies in the area for 4 seconds by 35%. And the third one spawns a decoy that attacks enemies for 4 seconds for 4 hits as well. From how it was initially presented on the patch notes, I thought that you would be switching between all 3 depending on the situation. You would use the fear to self-peel or set up for teammates. You'd use the slow maybe in team fights or in zone denial situations just to slow down enemies and maybe multiple of them as well. And then you'd use the decoy in order to maybe help clearing or finish off a target that you otherwise wouldn't reach. And here's the sad reality check. In 90% of all situations, you're best off using the fear. This is not only because the fear is a stronger crowd control ability that can also disrupt enemies. It's also because the fear has a 1 second duration, which is comparatively relatively long, at a very long range on a relatively short cooldown. It is also because the slow field only applies on the second proc of the ability. So the sword comes down, damages an enemy, the enemy probably starts walking away, and then the slow field appears with a second damaging tick. What that means is that in almost all situations, the enemy is almost outside of the slow area by the moment that the ability actually procs. So they maybe take 1 step forward and then they're out. And that's what's going to happen unless they're already locked down or they have to walk through a specific area. This feels incredibly counterintuitive. If the slow actually appeared instantly when the sword crashes down, that would make the second hit easier to confirm, and then the field duration actually would have more of a purpose. I originally thought that you would actually stay slowed if you walk outside of the slow area, but that is not the case. It's only in the area. So even if the enemy was already heavily hit by diminishing returns, you'd still get more out of the fear in the vast majority of situations. And the decoy is probably even worse. The decoy also only spawns if the enemy gets hit by the secondary effect, but that in itself is not a big deal. The bigger deal is that the decoy gets 1 shot, so the damage output is almost negligible, and that it only spawns when you hit an enemy guard. I originally wrongly assumed that you would be able to spawn the decoy on the wave, and that it would help you clear. To me, that would make a lot of sense, because that is a clear situation where you prefer some extra damage, on a single target obviously, over some CC that you can't really use there. Obviously it'd have to be somewhat restricted, so maybe just 1 decoy spawning per hit instead of multiple decoys for multiple targets. But still, that would feel a lot better with this ability than what it currently is. It is literally just the worst decoy in the game. Because no one's ever going to fall for it and everyone will just instantly kill it. And that really makes your usage 90% fear, maybe 10% slow at best, and 0% decoy. The only reason to use the decoy is getting marks on the target for her passive. And there's a little spoiler for you here. Don't bother. Don't bother wasting a 1 in order to apply the last mark. The damage that you're going to lose on the ultimate is incredibly negligible. We're talking about 85 base damage and 5% scaling. And the extra width that you're getting is incredibly negligible if you already have multiple marks on the target. but you are going to sacrifice a fear, which is a perfect setup for your own ultimate. So you could just use the fear to confirm the ultimate anyways and deal a lot more damage probably. So as you can see, the balance of the 1 overall is pretty questionable. When it comes to the second ability, it just feels very, very slow. It has a very long wind-up, and if you're trying to hit the secondary part of the ability, you almost depend on having some setup CC used before that in order to actually confirm it. So that is, I guess, something that is meant to offset the potential of this ability, especially if an enemy attacks you at close range. But then again, it's also relatively countable. There are a lot of characters that have immunities to knockups, and if they have that, then buy self-peel, I guess. At that point, you really rely on backpedaling with the ultimate or using the fear of your 1, and that is another reason why you don't want to waste your 1 on a decoy. And then we have the 3, Shroud of Wildfire. One thing that is important to note about this ability is that it's actually surprisingly hard to hit at times, because it's a very thin line projectile. It is fast, and you can correct it for quite a while, but it's definitely one that is not hard to miss. I think the circle part at the end of the targeter makes it a bit misleading because it makes the ability look easier to hit overall. It is easy to hit if an enemy is at exactly that range, but when they're not, it's a little bit harder to hit. But more importantly, the damage output of the first part of this ability is actually relatively low. And since this is your primary line and therefore primarily clearing ability in most situations, that is kinda rough. You can clear in other ways, but that requires you to either push back the wave before it clashes with the other wave, or sacrificing your main self-peel, which is pretty much equal to sacrificing your escape on other guards. And that puts you in the awkward spot where you want to use this ability for clearing and you want to level it, but it just doesn't do a lot of damage. And especially because you can't hit the full wave with the burn effect, it'll never really do much damage, and the wave won't leap for the bonus damage either, obviously. The more games I played, the further I wanted to stay away from this ability and just opt into the other abilities first, because the benefits that you get from leveling them are feeling in some ways more significant than what you get out of leveling Shroud of Wildfire. And I'm not really sure how Hi-Rez imagines her clear to be used. Maybe they want us to use the Dragonflight, the 2, and just sacrifice that self-peel. That is a more aggressive method to clear, and if you level it early, the cooldown goes down quite a fair bit, but that seems very, very risky in many situations. And in the context of the ultimate, we have to talk a little bit about the bigger picture. So let's have a look at that. These are all of Morgan Le Fay's base damage values on rank 1 of the ability, as well as rank 5, as well as her scalings and the cooldowns. What you can see here is that her base damage values on level 1 are around 100, except for the 2, which is at 125, but that's also, again, a fair bit more risky to use and has a longer cooldown. And all of the base damage values at rank 5 are around 300. The scalings are 90%, 85%, but the 3 only comes in at 50%, including the ticks from the dot, but not including the bonus damage if an enemy leaps. I think that's something that actually relatively rarely happens. Let's compare this to Raijin, who in some ways, but not in all, has a very similar kit. Here we can see that his 1, which main clearing ability, starts with 120 base damage, so similar to Morgan's 2. It scales up in base damage to 360. This ability at max rank also has a 9 seconds cooldown. His other abilities have significantly lower base damage values as well as lower scalings, with one of them being escape as well and having a longer cooldown, but that's not really a problem for him, because Raijin has one strong damaging ability that hits the full wave and helps him clear and has a short cooldown. And because of that alone, he can outpressure someone like Morgan Le Fay quite easily, unless she chooses to use 2 abilities to clear, and then she can't really do much with the pressure that she builds afterwards. So having many damaging abilities is nice, but you can kind of see how it becomes a little bit of a problem if they're all very similar in their damage output. Also keep in mind that Morgan Le Fay's 2, which looks like it's slightly higher damage on rank 1, won't hit the full wave with both parts as well, so that's actually lower too. And now let's have a look at the ultimates. Morgan Le Fay starts at 320 base damage with 130% scaling. Raijin starts at 400 base damage with 200% scaling. This assumes that Morgan Le Fay has 2 marks on the target. If you have an additional mark, it's a slightly increased damage, but it's honestly negligible, and you're rarely gonna have more than 3 marks. At max rank, Morgan Le Fay's ultimate almost catches up in base damage. It's now at 920 versus Raijin's 960, but still has significantly lower scalings. Now, if we look at the total damage output of the abilities, we can see that Morgan Le Fay still comes ahead a little bit. And that, I think, is something that demonstrates why I found the ult very underwhelming. Different from Raijin, her ultimate is a significantly lower portion of her damage. And that's why I often felt like it's more worth it to use it for safety and just to get away for the CC immunity while throwing out some swords at the end. Whereas my initial impression upon learning about her passive and the runes and everything that scales together was that she is focused on playing around the ultimate, getting the ultimate up often and then taking out enemies with the ultimate. But the damage of the ultimate doesn't justify playing like that at all, which also makes the runes effect kind of whatever. It's okay, it's there, but it doesn't really do all that much. The 10 seconds that you can reduce the cooldown of the ult by only apply if the ult is on cooldown, and so far I haven't felt like I want to use it so frequently that it is usually on cooldown when this effect applies. And I quickly want to throw up a list of other ultimates here for damage comparison's sake. You can see that Scylla, Baba Yaga, Thoth, Poseidon all do more damage with the first rank of their ultimate, even though they usually just have one hit of that. Persephone is the only exception here, but her ultimate is also massive utility. Then in late game, Morgan Le Fay's ultimate starts outscaling some of them quite a fair bit, getting around 100 or more base damage over the other options. The scaling, relatively similar though. But what you have to keep in mind is that Morgan Le Fay's ultimate are also multiple projectiles, and these projectiles can be duped. Now my judgment here is far from perfect because her ultimate is super clunky, buggy and laggy on ping, kinda like Baba Yaga's ult was when it originally came out, and sometimes if your ping is high enough you even have projectiles just disappearing or not firing. That is not a problem on low ping, so that gives it a very different impression where it might be a lot easier to hit as well. What this means altogether is that her kit has a massive amount of ramp up. She wants to have CDR to apply the different effects of the one effectively, she wants to have a fair bit of power to utilize her higher scalings because their base damage really doesn't do that much, and she wants to get to a high level to utilize the ult effectively. And that feels weird in the sense that she is at the same time a god with 3 damaging abilities and no escape. Other immobile gods typically offset this by having very high damaging abilities that also start off relatively strong relatively early. Think for example Anubis or also Zeus. So in Morgan's case she basically needs to be protected until late game, helped a lot by teammates in order to come online, and I'm not really sure if her current potential justifies doing that, committing that much to get this character to late game in order to see her effect when other characters just do similar things early. At the same time, with a lot of cooldown reduction in late game, her 1 is an absolute nuisance to play against. A 6 seconds cooldown fear that lasts for 1 second that you can throw from basically anywhere is an excellent setup and disruption that can really frustrate the enemy. As such, I think she feels too weak in some ways, but will also feel too strong in others. That may ironically end up making her somewhat balanced, but that would be a very bad and unstable balance in my opinion, if she ends up being balanced in the first place. The other gripe that I have with her design that I also wanted to express is that her entire concept, the early teaser, the trailer that we had, and then all the other text teasers that came afterwards, as well as the new trailer, all went on and on about mind games, influencing the enemies, doing this and that to their heads and whatnot. And the result of that we're now seeing in game is incredibly disappointing in my opinion. We see a fear and a decoy. And that's all the components that we have that have anything to do here with mind games. Yeah, there's a slow, there's a knock-up, that's not anything about mind games, and anything else is just range damage. Where is this massive enchantress component that she is so known for? There's so much more potential, especially in what could have been done with the ultimate, than what we saw so far. We could have literally seen an ability like what we saw in the trailer with the burning city illusions and then the wall of fog and everything. We got none of that. I don't even know why they showed that in the trailer when they were not planning on doing any of that. Instead we have a little fire ring out the enemy that deals some extra burst damage when they leap away. Big mind games there. I think Hyren's got the idea of the trickster quite right with Danzaburo, who has a lot of interesting utility for a carry. But with Morgan Le Fay, I really don't see much of that, and I see her more as a very traditional artillery damaging mage. So I don't know where that all went and why it's not in her kit, and I think that's rather sad because I think that would have allowed her to stand out in a different way and make her appealing to more players. As such, I'm not really a fan of Morgan and will probably never be, but I hope that some of you will enjoy her more than I do if you like that type of playstyle. If you want to stay updated for more SMITE videos like this one, I will have a video about one of the item changes from the last patch coming in the next days. So if you want to see that, click like and subscribe, or I will go to my garage, hide in the corner, stare at my home gym and contemplate if it's harder for me to find the time to work out or for you to find. Thanks to my patrons for making this video possible. That includes That Nick Walker, Drain Brennan, Lender25 Green, Zelaria, Zed the Undead, Nevitz Jr., Rawas, Angel, Z Faroli, and everyone else you see here.